Welcome to SEL 102. We are so glad you're here for our second look at social emotional learning in the month of January. My name is Tiffany Justice, co-founder of Moms for Liberty, and I will be sitting down this evening with Abigail Shrier, author of Bad Therapy: Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. If you haven't read this book, it is absolutely essential reading on the topic of SEL and mental health amongst our youngest generation. Just as her 2020 book, Irreversible Damage, helped so many to understand the gender crisis in our country, Bad Therapy will be indispensable to parents trying to understand the mental health crisis and how it is playing out in our nation's classrooms and our homes. Moms for Liberty has already done a book club on Bad Therapy in March 2024. It is accessible via our SEL Parent Toolkit in the M4LU Resource Library. You can go to m4lu.org to locate that. Tonight, we will focus on the chapters of her book that specifically deal with social emotional learning in schools. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. This event is scheduled for 1 hour. Depending on what device you are using, there should be an audience chat feature to the right of your viewing screen, as well as a Q&A feature. Please feel free to comment to your fellow audience members throughout the discussion, and be sure to utilize the Q&A feature to ask your questions at the end. As a warning, rude or demeaning comments will get you removed from this event, and you will not be permitted to re-enter. Keep an eye out for polling questions, and we will display the results of those in near real time. I must remind everyone that the opinions of our guests are always their own and may not necessarily reflect those of M4LU or Moms for Liberty. And with that, I would like to introduce our guest, Abigail Shrier. Abigail Shrier is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor at the Free Press. She is the author of the New York Times bestseller and international bestseller Bad Therapy: Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up, which was named a Best Book of 2024 by NPR. Sometimes they get it right. Her previous national bestseller, Irreversible Damage: The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, was named a Best Book by The Economist and The Times of London. Her books have been translated into more than 20 languages. In 2021, Shrier received the Barbara Olson Award for Excellence and Independence in Journalism. She holds a Bachelor of Arts from Columbia College, where she received the Uretta J. Kellett Fellowship, a Bachelor of Philosophy from the University of Oxford, and a JD from Yale Law School. She clerked for Judge Judith W. Rogers on the DC Circuit. Please welcome Abigail Shrier.
Hi, it's great to be here. It's great to be talking to you, Tiffany, and it's great to be with Moms for Liberty again.
Well, we're so happy to have you. Thank you for joining us again. I know when we first met, I think I was talking to you a little bit about social emotional learning, and you said, just wait, I'm working on that. So you have an ability to touch the pulse of really what is affecting American life. You're a mom too. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and your family, if you'd like to start, just so we have a frame of reference.
Sure. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids, and they're currently 14, and 11. And, there's no issue, with kids, kids are usually considered a mom issue, right? I mean, that's the mom purview. The truth is, it should be an all of us issue. There is no more important issue than what happens with our kids, how they turn out, and whether we are creating a good generation of Americans who are solid, who are strong, and who are level-headed. And certainly that's something that's preoccupied me, not only on the personal level, but also intellectually. What do I do to raise good kids and good citizens? So that's sort of how I approach things.
Wonderful. So when you start Bad Therapy, and you and I've discussed this book a lot. Again, I recommend for people who want to kind of delve into the whole of the book, please go to that book club. Please pick up the book and read it. But we're going to start with iatrogenesis. This was kind of a new word to me, Abigail. It wasn't something that I was familiar with. So maybe you could talk about the iatrogenic effects of therapy.
Sure. So iatrogenesis is a Greek word. It's a very old concept. And the idea is literally, it means when the healer harms. And the idea is sometimes in the course of introducing a treatment, a healer, a doctor, a therapist, whomever, introduces a harm. So you go to the ER for an X-ray, and of course you're subjected to a lot of radiation, and you can, end up with problems from that. You can pick up MRSA in an ER. So in the course of treatment, we know that all treatments, no matter how good, come with some risk. And the point of the book is to point out that therapy, while it can be very good, even life-saving, also comes out with risk. So when do you not introduce therapy to your kids? Most importantly, when they don't need it, because it always comes with risks. And we can talk about what risks if you want.
Yeah, let's think about that. So, social emotional learning is happening in America's classrooms
Yeah.
all over the country. If you watched our 101 for Moms for Liberty University members that are following along with us, you got to hear the way that social emotional learning is entering the classroom. And we had Dr. Kalm there joining us, a psychopsychologist, Abigail, and she was sharing that this is whole group therapy
Yeah,
happening in the
that's right.
classroom. So, can we talk a little bit about the fact, as you said, here you have a group of children who have numerous things happening in their lives, and now
Right.
all of a sudden, they're all getting therapy in the classroom?
They are. Let me just start by saying this. If what social emotional learning did, right? If it made kids stronger emotionally, if it made them kinder to each other, if it made them more emotionally able to regulate themselves, if it made them, stronger and more resilient in the face of failure or hardship or even just disappointment, we would all want it.
Yeah.
So, like every other project they sell us in the schools that actually turns out to not be good for our kids and actually turns out to be counterproductive, they sell it by something no one would disagree with. And then they do a bait and switch. If social emotional learning actually taught kids social emotional skills, I would be 100% for it. In fact, I think social skills are about as important as any kind of skills you need, right? The problem with social emotional learning is it definitely doesn't teach that. It doesn't teach social emotional skills. It can't teach that because they're not the sort of thing you can learn in a classroom. And what it does do is a lot of bad stuff, and we can get to that. But
So, yeah,
I want
go
to
ahead.
start out by just saying we would all want socially and emotionally attuned and strong kids. We all want that. We agree on that.
Sure. And social emotional learning has been happening in classrooms for some time. So, wouldn't it also be fair to say that we would be seeing some of the benefits if it was actually doing the work that it was supposed to? But we're seeing is the opposite, Abigail. Our
That's right.
kids have never been dealing with more mental health issues, have
That's
they? Or
right.
can you give us a state of the kids today a little bit? You talk about in the second chapter a young girl named Nora. And she said, I think you say the mental health establishment has successfully sold a generation on the idea that vast numbers of them are sick.
That's right. I mean, over 70% of young women believe that their mental health problems are a key part of their identities. That's the rising generation. They believe that's why they're putting it in their social media profiles. Their mental health disorder or struggle is a key part on their identity. Imagine what we've done to kids when we make that part of their identity, part of who they are. Okay. And they are overdiagnosed. They're overdiagnosing themselves. They're saddled with these limitations. And look, it's not just anecdotal. We might just say it doesn't seem to be working. These seem to be really dysregulated kids. And I interviewed a lot of teachers who attest to that. But there's something bigger than that I have. And that is there have now been meta studies in which they've looked at this program in England and Australia, where they looked at school kids. They put them through social emotional learning. These were prospective studies. They saw them at the beginning and then they studied them at the end. And they had a control group that didn't go through it. And what did they find at the end of these programs, at the end of obsessively focusing on their mental health, focusing on their bad feelings, talking about their bad feelings? Guess what? They had more anxious, more depressed kids and more alienated from mom and dad. And that's what we would expect to see. Why? Because these are the common side effects of group therapy. And that's what this is. It's a form of group therapy.
So, one of the points that I brought up in the SEL 101, Alex Newman and Kelly Shinkowski also joined us, Abigail, was the fact when you look at the suicide rate, it goes down during Christmas time when kids are off of school, and it goes back up when school starts. And then school ends for the year, and it goes down again for the summer. And you would think, as adults, as parents, that we would be looking at that and saying, what is going on in these schools that is driving kids to be so unhappy? So, I think we've got a lot of reflection to do as parents. I'm so glad we're talking about this.
I'll give you another study that just sort of piggybacks on what you just said. There was a study done of young college students who were brought home because of COVID. The ones who came home to a household with multiple siblings and parents, even when they desperately didn't want to be there because they wanted to be back at university, they ended up happier than the ones who stayed on
Ooh.
campus in isolation. Why? Because being stuck in a house with people you don't want to see is better for you than being stuck alone. And we've got kids stuck alone in their own heads, way too many of them. We need to get them out of their heads and into the world, and yes, with each other.
So let's talk about what social emotional learning looks like in the classrooms. You say it's a perfect storm. You teach kids to pay close attention to their feelings. You affirm and accommodate all of their worries. You monitor them. Tell us, what is it really looking like, Abigail? What did you find when you started asking questions about this?
So what I found is they take this good research and then they use it as window dressing for something that is bananas and counterproductive. And the good research shows that it's helpful for kids to have a vocabulary to talk about their emotions. We all know that. No one doubts that. So for instance, if a little boy is feeling and he says, I'm so angry, you might say, I'm so angry, I didn't get the chicken nuggets I want. You might say, you're not angry, you're frustrated. And they might think, oh, that's right. I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. And now you've given them sort of more tools. Nobody doubts that. But what we did was these mental health professionals did, and unfortunately educators as well, they went in to solve a problem that didn't exist. They decided if we flooded kids constantly with thinking about their emotional states, that this would also be good. And that there is no proof of, and in fact, is counterproductive. Thinking about yourself, thinking about your emotions is the way to become unproductive and depressed.
You quote a gentleman named Michael Linden in the book, and we were talking about circle time. And that for moms that are watching, if you have older kids, maybe you helped to do that. I remember when Second Step first was introduced in my daughter's kindergarten classroom, the teacher said, would you like to come in and lead circle time, right? And he says, if you start your day by asking yourself whether you are happy, the result can only be that you are not happy. Then
That's
you
right.
think you need to become happy. So what kind of a power does that adult in the classroom have with the children?
That's right. A tremendous amount of power. It immediately vulnerabilizes the child. Think about it this way. You might say, well, it's a neutral thing, social emotional learning. They can talk about a time when they're happy. They don't have to talk about a time when they're sad. But when they're talking about a time when they're happy, there's nothing to talk about and there's nothing for the teacher to do. There's nothing for this. There's no role for the school counselor. Nobody thinks the school counselor there is there to hear about how happy you are. So the only thing that gives the teacher and the educators and the class gets their attention and gives the counselor a role is when you say, now let's talk about a time when you were unhappy. And the problem is it's very natural for young people to dwell on the times that were hard or painful or unhappy. And social emotional learning always goes there. It always goes to the negative where they think they have something they can do. It gives them an opportunity to do the real work. And of course, it's counterproductive. Why? Because sitting around before your math test talking about your parents' divorce with a group of other fifth graders is probably the worst thing you could do if you want to actually learn some math and get your mind off it. Nonetheless, it's what kids are doing. And the other thing that naturally comes up is, well, who is supposed to keep you safe, healthy, happy, secure? It's parents, of course. So it naturally tees up criticism of the parents. And that's, I think, why it's causing also alienation from the parents. And when I say alienation, some people say, well, I haven't seen alienation. Well, you might not have, right? Because here's how it comes in. It's just a chipping away of the parents' authority.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean they immediately say, I hate their parents, although we are seeing greater alienation in this generation from their parents than we've ever seen, much higher rates. But it gradually chips away at the idea that mom knows what's best for me. Mom's in charge. Mom is more or less doing a great job taking care of me.
It's a lot to take in as a parent, right? You send your children off to school to learn to read, write, and do math. I think that's what most parents' expectations are. I don't think that a lot of parents believe that there's values clarification that's going to happen in the classroom. And certainly that children are going to be taught to subvert their instincts, which is what we see a lot when it comes to social emotional learning, right? You write in the book, subsequent interviews with dozens of teachers, school counselors, and parents across the country banished all doubt. Therapists weren't the only ones practicing bad therapy on kids. Bad therapy had gone airborne. For more than a decade, teachers, counselors, and school psychologists have all been playing shrink, introducing the iatrogenic risks of therapy to school kids, a vast and captive population. Abigail, are these teachers being given the skills that they need in order to be doing these types of interventions in the classroom?
No, and frankly, nor should they. There are way too many people playing therapist with kids. And let me just say, I'm a skeptic that therapy is ever appropriate in the middle of a child's school day. And not because I think that anyone has bad intentions, but because in general, if a child has a problem and there are kids who have real struggles who really need a therapist, having someone who takes spring break off, can't be reached all summer long, who changes the second you graduate middle school, is probably not the best thing for a child with a real need. But there are other problems too. A teacher knows all of your knows all the parents in the school, knows all of your friends, may have even met with them. The power dynamic is so great. The wonderful thing about therapy, when it works, when it's appropriate, is it's scheduled one-on-one, and the therapist is really only there to oversee one person at a time, or one young person at a time, and work with them towards making them stronger in some way, right? That's therapy at its best. But when there's someone you pass casually in the hall, when there's someone who knows the boy you just broke up with, who just broke your heart, that's usually considered inappropriate for therapists. Unfortunately, in the school domain, it's allowed. And that's where we get into these situations where the school counselors have tremendous power over these kids.
And so the increase in the mental health counseling is coming fast and furious. We see even well-meaning politicians talk about, more mental health
Yeah,
resources, right? Everybody wants to put money into mental, because
that's
we are
right.
concerned about our children's mental health, and there are definitely red flags all over the place. But and more mental health counseling in schools is not the answer. But Abigail, they are justifying these interventions by these surveys. Parents
That's
Defending
right.
Education, I know you worked with, and they gave you troves of surveys that they were pulling out of the schools. Can you give us a snapshot of what those looked like and what your thoughts were about them?
Absolutely. So in order to justify this and by the way, across the political spectrum, politicians say they think it's a no-brainer. We need more mental health care in the schools. You will hear both sides saying this. They think it can only be correct, right? What harm could be done by having teachers, counselors, and social workers in a school casually administer a kind of therapy to all the kids? Okay. And one of the ways they justify this is they give them mental health surveys. Now, these mental health surveys, many of them are put out by the CDC, but they are all across the states. Every state has them. And they are incredibly invasive series of questions about whether your child has committed self-harm, what kinds of self-harm they may have committed, what kind of drug use have they used, have they considered the following methods. Have they tried strangulation? Have they tried self-burning? In incredibly granular detail, what kind of sex hacks have they tried? If a child has not been engaging in these things, at the very least, they will walk away with the impression that the world is very dark, that people around them, teens there around them, are doing all the sorts of these things. They're giving them, even to middle schoolers, that they may be the only ones not engaging in these behaviors, and that these behaviors are very normal.
So trauma-informed care, not for everyone, is what you're saying. Is that what I'm hearing?
Trauma-informed care means putting a healthy child in a wheelchair. That's what it means, treating every child as traumatized. And guess what? You stick a healthy kid in a wheelchair and their muscles atrophy. That's what's going on emotionally. We're treating every child as damaged. And lo and behold, they are acting that way. What we should be doing is telling them, you're fine. You're doing great. You can pick yourself up. I know you've been through something hard. Keep going. I know you're disappointed in that math test. I know you're sad you didn't make the basketball team. You'll be fine. And showing them that we believe they can be. A session with the therapist is the opposite of that. When it's not necessary, a session with therapist can be ruminative. It encourages focusing on bad feelings and stewing, which is the number one symptom of depression.
We're going to talk quickly while I have you about restorative justice. You say, and that's a subject that we're going to be covering in a subsequent month, Abigail, at M4LU, because it's such an important issue that's happening in the schools. The number one issue we hear from teachers, especially, is the discipline issue, right? And so you talk about restorative justice, and you say delinquency is up, chaos reigns, the system that elevated emotional harm to physical harm wound up excusing physical harm in the name of emotional well-being. Can you talk about social emotional learning and restorative justice and the patterns you're seeing in our schools regarding students and their behavior?
Absolutely. It was a dear colleague letter from Obama, President Obama, that kicked this off in the schools. And the idea was President Obama wrote this letter to the schools and threatened the loss of funding because too many children of color were facing suspension and expulsion, in his view. And the idea is we should no longer punish bad behavior that was inequitable. Instead, we should engage in this, what they call restorative practices. And the idea is that no one is punished. They are understood. The victim is brought before the attacker, and they are supposed to both apologize to each other. It is deeply immoral. It can be traumatizing for the kid who actually is bullied. And it certainly allows delinquents to get away and keep going with what they've been doing. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing bad behavior get worse.
So parents are left in a really concerning place when it comes to their children in school. A lot of parents do have their children in public schools. I'd love to say that social emotional learning is only happening in public schools. It's not. It's happening in schools all over the country. Can you talk about what you saw as far as your research is concerned? What percentage of parents should be concerned if their kids in a school that they're getting some type of social emotional learning intervention?
It's in so many schools at this point, but it's one of those things that it sort of doesn't even occur to you until your child is being picked or is being bullied, and then all of a sudden you realize that that kid is not getting punished. You'll see that the delinquency, they get away with it, and that your child is going to be treated as if they did something wrong for not putting up with it. Very often they'll ask the child who was attacked by the bully what they might have done to provoke the bully. And that's how it is it's a therapeutic. Remember that therapy is fundamentally non-judgmental, which means it's amoral. That's the idea. It doesn't take a moral position. And with adults, sometimes we want someone just to listen and not take a moral position. The problem is with children, we always want adults to take the moral view. We want them to reflect our values and our sense of what's right and wrong, because the kids are just learning what's right and wrong. And we don't want a therapeutic approach to bad behavior. We want punishment.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, without revealing too much information, members of Moms for Liberty found out that in a school district across the nation, in fifth grade, 3 students were sexually assaulted by another student in the school. The parents were not notified, and Abigail, they did restorative justice with those 3 students and the child that had sexually assaulted them in the bathroom without the parents knowing. So it's pretty crazy what's actually happening. I would always advise parents to know and understand that you need to tell your kids to not have private conversations with other adults at the school.
What you just said is so shocking.
It is
I
shocking.
mean, it's worth sitting like just with a moment with that. The thing that gets parents is they always expect that the adults on the other side in the school to be reasonable people with good sense, who are decent and will respect their home. They will not do that, unfortunately. They are not doing that far too often. And so you have a child, God forbid, you have a child who's sexually assaulted. The first person you need to inform is the parents.
That's right.
Right? But the parents are treated across the board, whether it comes to gender ideology or social emotional learning, they are treated as suspect, if not the enemy or the abuser. And we're seeing that consistently. The people who are there to guard, who actually have the most invested in that child, are the ones kept in the dark.
It was a shocking situation, and I know that law enforcement is involved now. And so, but what's your message to parents? I mean, we've got audience questions. I'm excited
Sure.
about the audience questions. Again, if you have not read Bad Therapy, I really suggest you pick it up and buy it for your superintendent and your school board members. Go give it to them. Ask them to read it too. Um, Abigail, what always strikes me when we're talking about a lot of these things, I want to talk about parenting at the end. I want you to give some advice to parents, but I just want to kind of talk about root issues for a second. Everyone talks about taking the phones away in school. I'm a proponent of phones away in school. I don't think kids should have phones out in the classroom. I don't know how I feel personally about the government taking control of my private property. However, I think that we have a discipline issue in the schools. If the teacher can't stand in front of the classroom and command the respect of the students to listen to her about put your phone away or what have you, we have a real breakdown in the relationship and the authority that the teacher has in the classroom. And so the root issues when it comes to social emotional learning, we do have children who are dealing with a number of different mental health issues. Schools are intervening. What should parents be doing as schools are intervening? And I wonder, in writing Irreversible Damage and seeing some of the interventions that the schools were taking around the gender identity issues, which stems, of course, from mental health distress in the child, what parallels were you drawing when you were writing Bad Therapy?
One of the clearest things that became clearest to me is that parents had lost their confidence that we knew how to do this thing that was raising our kids. There's been a profound loss of confidence. And I'll tell you something else, and I want everyone to know this. We know how to raise good kids in this country. We have been doing it for generations. Okay? If you want to know what the right thing to do is, ask someone who's done it, not a parenting expert. Someone who has raised good kids to adulthood, your parents, your grandparents, ask somebody who has raised good adults. They will have more sense than any parenting expert. And I have to say, of all the people that, I'm most suspicious of, these parenting experts whose oldest child is 9, but they have millions of followers. You have no idea how that kid's going to turn out.
It's true.
That person should be advising 0 people, right? And I would just say that when parents sense that something's not right for their child, they need to act on it. And they need to remember, look, I know you feel stuck. I know that this is the best schools in the best school system or whatever, but nothing's more important than your kid. And if you feel like something bad is going on, take your kid out.
What if
Whatever
you
you have
feel
to do. Yeah, go ahead.
What if you feel that your child does need help, mental health help? I think that's such a scary thing for parents because there are kids who are genuinely dealing with issues. And I feel like parents right now don't know who to trust,
So it depends what the issue is. If
right?
what the issue is a disorder, if it's a phobia, if it's anorexia, obsessive compulsive disorder, there are a lot of these where there are really good treatments. And what you do is you meet with a cognitive behavioral therapist who's good at this, and you set a schedule and you measure the progress, right? And they will measure progress with you, the good ones. They won't treat your child as an annuity and keep them forever. What you don't want is a child with vague unhappiness, stuck week after week, dredging up what might be wrong with a therapist, because that can go on forever. And they might dredge up something that isn't causing their problem, but nonetheless convinces them that it is. And that's not what you want. You don't want them to invent trauma with a therapist. Kids are really suggestible. So you take your kid to a therapist when there's a real problem. In other words, you can't stabilize your kid otherwise. How do you try to stabilize your kid otherwise? Give them a good life, which means get them out of the house, get them involved in community, get them involved in exercise, get them involved in activities outside of the home where they're seeing other people and being productive. Teach them a skill, get them a job. All these things are really good for kids. They really are. Chores, responsibility. But what you don't want to do is just, my kid's a little unhappy. She seems a little depressed or a little anxious. I'm going to sign her up with this therapist for years on end, where they sit around talking about, what mom might have done wrong.
You said that love occasionally means telling a therapist to get lost. If your school has intervened with your child in some way and you believe they're interfering with your child and your ability to parent your child, some advice for parents on how to approach that school in conversation.
So here's what I would say. I mean, I can tell you what I did with my own school. My kids are in private school, and I did, right away once I was researching this book, I met with the psychology staff, the counselor, and the psychologist, and I said, I want to be very clear with you. You do not have my permission ever to meet with one of my kids in private.
That's right.
That's not allowed. Now, some states don't allow you to opt out, so it's worth finding out if your state does. But I made that very clear. That is not to be allowed. Now, a lot of parents don't have that option. They might be in a state that doesn't have to inform you. And they're always telling you to come meet with the school counselor. I have literally talked to parents where the school counselor was helping this very confused young boy. He was a sophomore in high school. And first to diagnose him with ADHD and get various accommodations the mother did not think he needed. And then eventually his mother caught the counselor recommending LGBTQ youth shelters that the boy might run away to. I have seen counselors so completely overstep what anyone would consider normal or appropriate that, in general, I would say you want to not avail yourself of the school counselor if you can avoid it.
Well, I would like to take some audience questions. We're coming up on that time. So now, everyone, you've seen there is some polling that's coming out at the bottom. Feel free to answer those as we keep moving forward through this Q&A. If you haven't asked a question yet, please do. That you have the Q&A side chat there. You can go and place your questions. Not everybody gets to have a convo with Abigail Shrier, so let's make the most of it and ask some good questions. And I'm not exactly sure. This is my first 102, Abigail. So we'll see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Shanna asks, what studies have been done exploring the effects, what affects the increase in SEL mental health programs in schools, whether public or private, has had on academia, lowering learning expectations and standards? So is it affecting the quality of the teaching and learning in schools, Abigail?
So I would say probably, because whenever you bring in something that's not school and you take up a big chunk of the school day, you're going to affect how much school stuff, substantive subjects you can teach. There's something else that I talk about in the book, which is demoralizing the kids before a math test will decrease performance. So making a child think about themselves, um, that it induces what they call state reflection of, reflection on their own state and their own minds. That's not what you want to do if you want to get a task done. So it's very likely that it reduces performance. We haven't seen any studies done on what the impact on performance is. I can tell you that there's no indication that it improves performance.
That's right. Taking up
Um,
precious time.
Sorry. Yes.
Yes, taking up precious time. So over 70% of the people on here are very confident they know how to parent their child well, Abigail. So we're doing well so
Great.
far. That's wonderful.
Amazing.
Great, great, great. Next question. Let's see if there we go. How do you know when your child or grandchild's teacher is lying to you when you ask them if they're instilling I think that's supposed to be instilling SEL, not insulting. We can insult SEL all day.
So here's what I would say. I hear this a lot. And I used to hear this with the first book with the gender stuff. They would, a parent would see that what the material coming home, they would object to it and they would go in good faith and talk to the teacher or principal. They would then get the teacher or principal's assurance that this would not happen again. And of course it would happen again. And what I would just say to parents is stop relying on the principal, stop trusting the principal and the teacher to tell you the truth. Sometimes they will. Sometimes you get lucky. I've met a lot of wonderful educators. The problem is they're often the scared ones. And the ones who are aggressively pushing things on kids are willing to deceive parents. We know this. And so what do? You talk to your child. And I don't care how old they are. Tell them what you think of this gender nonsense. Tell them. You're a girl. You'll always be a girl. If that's what you believe, tell them. If you give your child your values, if you tell them what you think, that will have a big impact. And then they'll be able to report back to you on what was done and you can talk about it with them. But too often parents, I think, are a little shy about instilling our own values in our kids, and we shouldn't be. That's our job.
I think public school and public education has also done a good job of making you think that maybe you're just not smart enough to be the
Yeah.
expert, right? This idea that, like, oh no, don't worry about this. Don't try to do the math homework with them. You don't understand, right? What we're trying to do here. You just stay out of it, and we'll handle this aspect of your child's life. And
That's
obviously, it's up to us to draw that boundary. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that boundary.
That's exactly right. That's why I wrote the book. It's to empower parents. And I want to say something. They do this with all kinds of ways. In SEL, they do it with phony brain science. So I
Mm.
interviewed a lot of neurobiologists and neuropsychologists to find out what was behind this phony science. It's what they call neurotrash. It's most of it is completely false and garbage. We don't actually know that much about the brain when it comes to which systems light up when and what's going on in a child's brain when they're frightened or concerned or scared. We know our tools for even measuring and assessing these things are incredibly crude, even now, even today. And when educators bring this out, what do? They do it to intimidate parents, to make them feel that if they don't understand their child's amygdala, they can't possibly make a judgment for the child. It's a ridiculous notion. Parents have been raising good people long before we even knew there was an amygdala, and parents should not let it intimidate them now.
Great. Okay, let's see. We have another question. What happens to the student data once it's collected via these leading surveys? Who holds this data in the end?
Great question. I don't know. A lot of these are private services. They promise they have independent contracts with the state. It's not even clear if they're covered by the same statutes that normally protect student privacy. And every once in a while, they're hacked. This happens. And the information a child reveals can be leaked. We've seen now a number of these educational programs, that have been hacked, and now the information, your child shares with the school counselor that she was molested, and is now out there. That we don't want that, and the data mining is one of, I think, one of the most concerning aspects of all of this, is that they're collecting this data on your children that they really have no entitlement to, and whether it's safe is really anyone's guess.
Yeah, I shared, and I'll share again. I was at a conservative policy think tank meeting, and they had a sponsor come up from that for that conference, and they got up, and I very quickly realized that they were actually selling the kids' data in the program that they were using, and it was. I was like, "Oh, time out, time out! We've got a problem here." But so often people just don't realize that it's happening. Even when I think the organizers were a little horrified once they realized. Donald asks, how can I identify specific costs related to SEL in our school budget? What specific line items should I review? This is such an important question
Oh.
because parents want to get in there, Abigail.
It's a great question. I wish I knew the answer. Unfortunately, I don't. I don't know the
Okay.
answer to that.
So I would start asking questions of your student services department in your school district. That's normally where a lot of this social emotional learning is coming from. You want to know what the mental health interventions that are happening, how many counselors they have, how many psychologists they have in the
Yes.
schools, and then normally there's a program that they'll use, and in the SEL toolkit, it'll go over some of the different programs. The thing about it is that there's CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, that sets the framework for social emotional learning, but then you have all these different groups and private entities that come in with the curriculum that the schools can utilize, and a lot of it also is actually free as well. So go to CASEL and see who's providing social emotional learning. You can go to their website and see who they work with, and then I would just do a search of the different companies and groups that they work with in your school district, and you should be able to uncover something.
Fabulous. And I'll tell you something, and you should opt out your kids from these surveys. They're
Yeah.
not doing any good. They're certainly not, they're anonymous. So they're definitely not helping your child. They're using your child to help justify more funding. And that's not an appropriate use of your child. And
And
I'll
opt
just say
out
one,
looks, yeah, go
sorry,
opt out. Well, I just want to say opt out looks like just send an email to your
right.
kid's teacher and to the principal and a superintendent and say, I do not want my child taking any surveys at school without my consent and knowledge.
And I will say something else. The best defense is offense, which is talking to your kids. Tell them what you think. Tell your kids, listen, we don't need a therapist. There's nothing wrong with you. That's for people who have, troubles. You don't have them. You're fine. Now, if your child has a problem, if they're anorexic, by all means, get them treatment. That's a different category. But I'm talking about the effort to treat all children as traumatized or, victims of traumatic harm. That we should push back on and tell kids, you're fine. You'll live.
Really hard question from Jolene. How can we exclude our student from trauma-informed teachings when it is infused in a variety of classes like math?
It's a heck of a question, and you're right. They're pushing it in every class. I think the thing to do is to refuse. I mean, to the extent that you can, see if you can get the kids together. You know, get the parents together to agree. We're going to learn math now. And there's going to be math. There's not going to be social. They are putting it in everything. By the way, that's your first clue that there's something ideological going on, because nobody who's ever done math thinks you need to first understand your bad feelings in order to do geometry.
Abigail, what did you think when you heard about the fact that they have that program Heart Math where they monitor the children's heart rate while they're doing math problems?
Wow. I mean, if a malevolent person wanted to increase anxiety around math or any subject, I guess you would do it about that way. The amount of attention, the amount of fevered attention that's given to math anxiety and test anxiety, we are creating the problem, and that's iatrogenesis. When we claim to be solving a problem, but really we're creating it.
Janet asks, is SEL tied to MTSS? I am in PA, and here the superintendent is speaking of MTSS at meetings. My school district has SEL rooms in its elementary, intermediate schools, and I'm going to, MTSS multi-tiered support systems. I think they're student support, right? So
That's
is SEL woven into those types of support?
Absolutely. Certainly in California, which is one of the sort of flagship MTSS programs, SEL is woven through the whole thing. And by the way, SEL can mean anything they want it to mean. So sometimes it's just straight up Marxism. It's just, critical race theory. And sometimes it is, let's talk about somebody who let you down, or a time when you're sad, or, is there too much fighting in your home? Let's talk about it. And all of these people in school, they're mandatory reporters. So if your child gives the wrong answer, a call to child services it's just a phone call away. And that's not they're supposed to be there to help with actual problems, not to pry into the homes of normal, healthy families and create problems.
This is a good opportunity to speak about gender ideology now and gender identity. Abigail, we are seeing moms and dads all over the country are seeing evidence of parents being reported for not being willing to affirm their child's want of changing their gender. It's quite the kind of firestorm moment for this issue of child protective services getting involved, and the government really judging whether or not a parent is a good parent or has the right to direct the upbringing of their children. Sometimes parents abuse their kids, and you don't have the right to abuse your child, but you certainly have the right to raise your child. And so what have you seen as far as, just that I know you've been up close and personal with the gender identity issue and parents dealing with custody issues around that?
The number of horror stories around CPS are unending, Child Protective Services. Anything from, the mom who was a fairly masculine woman. She worked in construction, did not want to affirm her child. This is one story I dealt. She did not want to affirm the idea that her troubled daughter was suddenly a boy. And the stepmom and the dad, who did not have custody, decided that it was great to celebrate. So it was used as the cudgel against the mom. The mom eventually lost all custody. But the numbers of these stories are endless. These are not homophobic parents. These are not cruel parents. They're parents who didn't get with the ideologues program. And yes, you can that's enough to get a call from child services and a determination that you're not a fit parent.
This is a really good next question, Abigail. The question is all tier one SEL in the classroom considered psychotherapy? So I know parents are kind of wanting to parse out, right? What are the things that are over the line, and where is the normal role of the teacher in helping the child to recognize how to handle their anger in the classroom? For example, Johnny, it's not okay when you get mad at Susie to hit her. When you get upset, you need to use your words and we need to talk, right? So where's the line
Great
for the
question.
teacher?
Here's what
Yeah.
I'll say. Like sex ed, it's gone so completely off course. I'm not sure that we can trust schools to teach it anymore. I mean that. I'm not someone who's against teaching kids about, STIs and whatnot. There's a certain level of sex education kids need. The problem is it's very obvious we can no longer trust the public schools to teach that, because what are they teaching? They're teaching anal play and the like. So with social emotional learning, I would say that get back to the basics. If a teacher is saying, we don't hit, you will go to the office. If you're angry, it depends on the age, right? If it's a 5-year-old, you have a different response. But there's no reason that normal acting out and bad behavior requires a social emotional lesson any more than it did a generation ago, when kids were much better behaved and schools were much better run.
What percentage of the day, Natasha asks, do you believe on average our children are subjected to on a daily basis of social emotional learning?
That's a great question. I don't know. It's going to vary by school, but it's a lot. They're talking about their mental health, as you just said, in everything from math class to history class. Everything's a time to talk about victimization and empathy and how that makes you feel. And everything is an opportunity to break your kids down. Because if you vulnerabilize a population of kids in the middle of the school day, that's what you're doing. You're breaking them down when they need to be strong. And yeah, kids need to be strong for school. It's hard, it's demanding. You have to get around along with all these other people. We want to build them up. So sitting around and talking about their pain is the opposite of building them up.
Let's see, we have one more question. What are the qualifications to be a school mental health specialist? I have heard that many schools are hiring unqualified personnel. Who is giving our kids psychotherapy at school? I think this is kind of twofold. So, what are some of the qualifications to be someone who deals with children around mental health in schools? And then, the question also becomes, should it be happening at all? Right?
Right. So it depends on the state. The state accredits them. School counselor is the easiest to get, and it can be as little as a year degree, and a year long degree, and of course that degree is going to be mostly in leftism. Unfortunately, in all the mental health professions, what they're really teaching now is a form of Marxism, and that's what supposedly accredits them. Of course, there used to be things like social work school, which actually taught the subject, but today they're also woke. It's a question of what they're actually teaching during that very quickie accreditation. But the problem is, then they go in and they're ready to play savior to your kid. I'm of the view, look, do I think that therapy can be very helpful and very useful and even life-saving? Yes. But I'm of the view that we can no longer trust the schools in this area. Why? Because they're going out and looking for problems. They're creating traumatic experience. They're looking for it. They're hunting for it. And that's not how you help someone. You don't create the mental problem. You wait and see if they are having distress, and then you address it. That's not what the schools are doing.
So, how do you bring this topic up to your young children? Someone asks, how do we prepare them for what they will likely encounter? And Abigail, I'll tell you, I see social emotional learning as a programming mechanism. That the school kind of readies the child to be able to take in a lot of different types of information by breaking down those boundaries and those instincts, by driving a wedge between the parent and the child, by keeping secrets with the child,
Right.
right? Which that's stranger danger. Anybody who tells you to keep a secret from mom, mom and dad would normally say that's not okay, and here we have the government doing it. And
That's right.
social emotional learning, again, when you tell your kids, if you have that funny feeling, if you think mommy's not going to like what you're going to do, then you should stop and think about that, right? I remember having that conversation, and schools instead are telling children, when you get that funny feeling, maybe that's a you problem, and you need to subvert that instinct. So how are you readying now? I mean, they're teaching 5-year-olds now in school that they could have been born in the wrong body, right?
That's
That their
right.
parents might have been wrong about something so basic as their biological sex. And so how do you handle that as a mom? What would you do knowing this information now?
So a few things. One is, if they're having a social emotional learning lesson, tell your kid, bring it home. I want to see it. And very often they will stop your child from bringing it home. And you say, I want to see that. Anything you're putting in front of my kid, I have a right to see. I'd like that lesson to come home. Oh, we don't send these books home. Make sure you get that lesson. See, and then you can talk to your kid about it. But there's something proactive you can do as well. Tell your kids what you believe about all sorts of things. If a child if you hear them saying, I can't, that's my anxiety, say, you don't have anxiety. You don't have an anxiety disorder. That's just worry. It's just nervous. Everyone gets nervous. It's no big deal. Okay. It's not anxiety. Oh, I
I
feel depressed.
remember,
That's not
yeah,
depression. Yeah.
I remember when my daughter was in third grade, she was going to take she had that state standardized test that was a big deal, right? You're going to pass third grade and go on to fourth. And her teacher gave all of the kids a packet of glitter. And she told them to put the glitter underneath their pillow that night, and it would help them to do better on the test the next day. Well, she induced all kinds of anxiety. My
Right.
daughter had never worried about a test before.
That's
Now
right.
she's having her put glitter under her pillow like some magic wish to do well on a test. And I just said to her, listen, everything you need is inside of you. And, you pray to God to give you support and help on your test tomorrow. You don't put glitter underneath your pillow. Besides the fact, it's like a breathing hazard. You shouldn't put glitter under your pillow, right? But here's this teacher doing something so well-meaning, but it's really going against the values that I have for my child. So it's just so interesting, the subtle ways that this school kind of creeps in, right, into
That's
how
right.
you.
They did something really similar in my kids' school. They said, your kids are taking the ERBs. You may want to write them a note to tell them that it'll be okay so that they don't get nervous before the test, which is, of course, the way to induce nervousness or anxiety before a test. So I told the kids, we're not doing that. You're going to be fine. It's a test. It's no big deal. And I would just say, I would encourage parents to do that. Don't let them make your kids crazy. Okay. They're going to talk to them about social phobia, testing phobia, all this stuff. You could just tell them it's nonsense. People take tests all the time. It's fine. It's no big deal. It's
Which
test
brings
what
us
you want.
just brings us to the next question. Why is it so hard now to raise kids like the old ways that our parents raised us? One is called old fashioned, and that I need to be more flexible because it is a different generation. So is that the case? Is it a different generation, or do we need to go back to the good old days when parents told their kids no every once in a while and set up some boundaries?
I think it is a different generation, but we made them different. We
Mm.
we forgot to give them the things that all kids need. They need time outdoors, they need physical activity, they need chores, they need a feeling of responsibility. We don't expect very much of them. They need expectations. They need work, they need efficacy in this world, right? Feeling like I can do this, right? And if you give your kids that, if you give them community, if you give them extended family, all these associations, the neighborhood kids, if you give them independence, then they're going to have a lot less of the random anxiety at the world. And that's what we're doing. We've got these kids who've basically been raised like the boy in the bubble, and they're going out into the world and they're filled with anxiety because we didn't expose them to it enough.
And yet we put phones in their hands, which expose them to the darkest alleys of the world. I saw someone say that, and we're going to be talking, we're going to be watching The Coddling of the American Mind. We're reading The Anxious Generation. So we're really diving deep this month in M4LU on these issues of our children's mental health and how we can help to improve their lives. I saw a question here by Robin. She said, Abigail, thank you for your incredible book. What is the moment that made you decide to begin this 2-year pursuit of knowledge on kids' mental health?
Wow. Well, what I wanted to know, I started with a question. I always start a book with a question. And my question was, why was the generation that had had the most therapy, the most psych meds, the most diagnosis, the most social emotional learning, the most coping skills, why were they also the most depressed, anxious, and dysregulated? And why didn't they want to grow up? Why weren't they thriving? No one got more therapy than this generation. Over 40% of them have already been in therapy. By 2016, 1 in 6 kids between the ages of 2 and 8 already had a mental health diagnosis. We were diagnosing them like crazy and treating them like crazy. So they should have been the picture of wellness. So why were they the picture of despair? And I wanted to know, and like a lot of things, we were causing them these problems. We were really producing, the result for them. And we needed to sort of undo that.
Well, we're happy that you wrote the book. We're very thankful about that. I'd like to close out, and we have just a few minutes left with you, talking about gender ideology and all of the progress that has been made on this issue since you published Irreversible Damage. That came out was that 2020?
2020.
2020. And so now we find ourselves in, January 2025. You have the president of the United States who will be, president-elect, who will be inaugurated in less than a week. who has said he will stop the transgender insanity that is happening across every facet of American life. What were your thoughts when you first heard Donald Trump say that?
I mean, it's amazing. I would just say that the one group that I believe the most in this country is American parents. And American parents saw the problem. They really raised their voices. They went to school board meetings. They spoke up, and they produced a lot of change, or a lot of good change. They were the alarm. And anybody else can be bought off, but not American parents. And I just keep doing it, keep watching out for your kid, and we can for your kids, and we can fix a lot of problems in this country.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it gives me a lot of hope that in the span of the 5 years that we've had with irreversible damage, the progress and the awareness that's been created, and now looking at bad therapy and then thinking, 5 years from now, will we be looking at this issue of really the overstep of schools around parental rights and our children's mental health? And we'll be on the other side of it, hopefully solving a lot of these issues because our kids need us to take action.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I will just say, they've made this whole project of child rearing so complicated. It
That's
really
right.
isn't. You want to give your kids capacity, right? You want to make them able and capable, and you want to make them moral people, good people. And if you've done that, you've done a lot.
Wonderful. I agree. Bethany Shondark Mandel is a good friend of Moms for Liberty, and she posted that exact thing on Twitter today. She said,
Oh, really?
I think parenting is being made too complicated. If you think it's really hard, you might be doing it wrong. And the truth is, kids need love and support. They want to be involved and learn about all of the things that you do, cook with them, do woodworking with them, right? Bring them around you and the things that you're interested in, and they love to be a part of it. So, Abigail, we just really love and appreciate you at Moms for Liberty. We enjoy reading your books. Can't wait to see what the next one will be about. But for now, I really urge everyone to go out and to get bad therapy and read it if you haven't read it yet, and give it to your friends as well. Abigail, your knowledge and insight this evening was awesome. And thank you
Thank
to
you.
the audience for joining us. We hope you'll continue learning about this important topic through the month of January. And I think we're going to see the graphic for M4L. There it is, M4LU, social emotional learning. So we've had SEL 101. This was SEL 102, a virtual lecture with author Abigail Shrier. We're reading The Anxious Generation, as I said. We'll have a virtual watch party for the coddling of the American mind. And that toolkit is currently available on Moms for Liberty's website. So don't miss our virtual online screening of The Coddling of the American Mind. Be sure to tune in and ask your questions directly of the filmmakers, Ted and Courtney Balaker, immediately after the film. And then on January 28th, Dr. Kam, who joined us for SEL 101, will be back to discuss Anxious Generation. If you want to be an expert on these issues, you need to read the books. And as Robin Steeman always says, why read it alone when you can read it with friends? Want to say a big shout out again to Robin Steeman for these incredible programs at Moms for Liberty University. She's doing a wonderful job. Go to M4LU for more information. And so this does it for SEL 102. This event has been recorded and will be posted within the week to the online SEL toolkit in the Moms for Liberty resource library. And will be accessible to you at any time. Please continue to follow M4LU, and as we have quite a lineup for the 2025 spring and fall semesters. You can see it right there. There's the spring semester, and then we have a fall semester as well. And if you would like to support Moms for Liberty University, please share our resources with friends and family. And if you feel so inclined, please donate to support this program at m4lu.org. Thank you again for joining us. As was famously said by James Madison, the advancement and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty. That is the mission of M4LU. Have a great night.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail.